Decolonization in Museums guidance, and I'm really delighted that with the support of some funders we've been able to put a project together on disseminating that guidance and supporting people to work with it and to do the practice in museums. And I'm even more delighted that the person who's leading on that is Roshi Naidoo, who's going to talk us through the guidance and hopefully support a conversation about how we can support decolonisation in museums.
Hello, thank you. So, first, thanks for a chance to speak, and also thanks for those of you that have come during your lunch hour, because obviously the best part of a conference is being able to talk to each other. So hopefully I'm going to give you a bit of time to do that as well. So, what I was like to start with is really the sort of title of this. I was going to call this Things People Have Said to Me in Museum Toilets, but I thought that might be open to all sorts of unfortunate interpretations. So instead it's called Supporting Decolonisation in Museums, Silences, Sighs and the Elephant in the Room. So a bit of background. So I've recently kind of come back to the sector after doing this sort of work on and off for about 20 years under different rubrics, under different funding streams. And I realized when I was kind of coming back, I was looking for some very specific words in the guidance that the Museums Association has produced. So I think I realized that, there have been a lot of good words and a lot of great commitments after the murder of George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter protests. Words and commitments which sounded more urgent, they sounded more radical, they sounded more informed by a sense that people should have their full humanity represented in the public sphere, and that obviously wasn't the case. And commentators were talking a lot about seismic shifts in 2020 and moments like the Colston statue in the harbour at Bristol. They were being sort of held up as emblematic of how this was really a moment of great change. But I think for those of us who've been around the block a few times, we needed a little bit more assurance. And I think we heard this after the murder of Stephen Lawrence and the publication of the Macpherson report, only to be kind of plunged back into a reminder of how immature a nation we are when, like, the Parrott report came out, for example. Those of us that can go back kind of even further, we remember that there were a great slew of initiatives after the uprisings in Liverpool, London, Bristol and places like that in the 80s. And we know that institutions, organisations, governments have historically been really good at talking the talk, but would they walk the walk? So my figuring was that if we're not just on a merry-go-round, we needed the languages and discourses to connect up contemporary racism, xenophobia, etc., with deeper histories of colonialism in a much more profound way. And importantly, what we have to understand is not that colonialism happened out there, colonialism happened over here, but the most important place it happened was up here. And I think it's that psyche of the nation and that kind of legacy that we're dealing with at the moment. So what I realized I was doing when I was thinking about applying for this job was that I was looking for clues in the document that there'd be space to do this. And what the principles here stress is that decolonisation has an ethical imperative, and that's come up a few times today. And I was looking, and are highlighted, as well as sort of long-term structural change. And I was really pleased to see this quote from Sathnam Sangra from Empire Land. A minute to look at that. But the most important thing in terms of these principles to me was the phrase "do the work," and I realized that on the one hand I breathed a sigh of relief, because I realized that all the times I'd been asked to quickly tell somebody something about Black history, quickly do something in a museum that was going to deal with something that was problematic, it left me in no doubt that it was actually me that was doing the work and nobody else, and then when I was gone, the work was gone too. But reading through the guidance, I think do the work seems to point to something much more profound, and it left me with the sense that here was an opportunity to do that deeper work. And for if long-term structural change was going to happen, we really needed to address the blockages from previous initiatives. And I think the part as museums attempt to understand their colonial pasts and their role in perpetuating our colonial presence requires some really forensic attention. So I kind of wondered, this time, would we be able to talk about white supremacy? Would we be able to draw a map between what happened to a girl being strip searched by the police in her own school in London and the histories of black women's bodies colonized and debased through centuries of regimes of power and control rooted in the economic, social, cultural, political, and psychological legacies of empire? Would we be able to connect this up with this work in relation to contemporary things like the Windrush scandal? Or would there be that sort of familiar sense of magnets with opposing polarity being pushed together to accommodate competing notions of what the meaning of British national culture is? And I started to think, would I be sitting in meetings listening to somebody disproportionately enthused about a new project that was going on to empower those formerly excluded, while others suddenly comments in the margin of their notebooks or aired their real feelings elsewhere? Now, I kind of flippantly started with the thing about things people have said to me in the toilet, but this is literally true, and this is what happens when race and racism enter the frame. You get anxious questions, you get the things people feel they say they can't say out there. You get words and phrases with loaded meanings said in meetings, and one has to go away and sit down and unpack them afterwards as to what was really being said. And I kind of realized I do exactly the same thing, and I couldn't do it anymore. I thought, I can't disassemble and bring one face to work. The mental cost that people of color experience in the sector is why there's an organization called Museum Detox. I felt like I had to bring my whole self to work, and that meant accepting that I don't necessarily come to this work from the same place as all of my colleagues. And pretending that in meetings can be really stressful and exhausting for all of us. So if we're honestly all going to come together in the sector to talk about the shared trauma of colonialism and its enduring legacies, we're going to have to confront some really big elephants in the room. And, you know, they're not just elephants, they're mammoths. For example, I'd often felt like doing this work, I feel like an untrained therapist, and I'd sort of sit in meetings and I'd sort of deal with mostly white anxiety about loss of authority, misplaced guilt, unmetabolized fear of difference, unmetabolized fear of sameness, trying to stress that our thinking around histories of class, for example, show us that we're all caught up in the same flows of colonial expansion, making notions of individual guilt really kind of unproductive. So in fact, I've been so focused on these things, I'd ignore how I and other people of color in the sector, you know, what it was like for us to be like, you know, on message with every new initiative, even before we'd found out if it was actually working. Now, Bill Schwartz talks about memory and empire and drawing on languages of psychoanalysis. He talks about the difference between working through and acting out. And I think it feels like this time we really have to work things through and not just act them out. And what I kind of really liked best in this document is this word messy. I think that's just really, really important. So I kind of had been thinking as well about some of the things that we've been talking about in relation to the culture wars today, and generally that's always it feels very pertinent to everything that we do in this area now. And it feels like the irony is that those people who are the warriors, let's call them, if they had a little reflection on the psychological legacies of colonialism and its traumatic imprint, not just on the disempowered, but on the powerful, it feels like they might be able to name their pain. It feels like they might be able to deal with their acute anxiety about this, you know, basically loss of authority. And because this terrain we're working in now is so, as people have used the word, emotional, it's irrational, it's hysterical. And I think we have kind of an easy out of pathologizing those people, you know, obviously because it is insane, a lot of it. We can't really deal with the illogic of the things that they're saying. But at the same time, it's given us an out to not think about our own kind of feelings about things. And I think one of those things is that we need to take those conversations that have been happening in the margins of our notebooks, that happen when we feel like we're in sort of different spaces. We need to really bring that into the frame, if it's going to work. And I wondered if it would be useful for us to actually sit and talk to each other about the things that we say, the things we feel we can't say if we're in a meeting which is about decolonization, anti-racism, Black history. Are there things that happen? And I don't think you need to disclose what they are, but I think all of us probably have things that we say or think about and feel that we don't want to share in a public forum. And I'm not asking anyone to share with it, but I think if we can start locating what the emotional basis of those feelings are and what the fears are, if we can kind of talk about it and connect about it, I think that might help us with the blockages that we've had in the past. For example, I was wondering if you can remember when you assumed that your response to something was going to be, might make you look bad, or it might make you look insensitive. I wondered if you felt like there were moments when something in your background wasn't being reflected in the discussion and something was kind of being squeezed out. Again, so I was just wondering if it would be really helpful for us, again, just to spend some time reflecting on that, reflecting on our feelings, reflecting on the things we don't say and can't say and feel like we don't have the space to say, and trying to unpack it a bit, because it just might give us some clues about how we can deal with some of this irrational universe that we're all in if we mention the word decolonization, if we talk about anti-racism. So if you feel like getting as close as you feel like getting in a context of social distancing, I'm going to invite you just to talk to each other once you've located a memory of something where you felt like, I want to say this to somebody, but I can't say it here. And if you can think about what you think that potential underlying that kind of hesitancy was. So take a bit of a moment to do that. And I know it sounds like a kind of a slightly weird thing to do, but I really think this is kind of where we're at. This is one of the blockages to our work at the moment. And it's come up all day. Okay, I'm going to give you 5 minutes. Wow, there's lots of good chat. Does anyone want to say? Shall we? Sessions, even if it's, God, that woman's a bit weird. Yeah? Sorry, I can't see very well, but if you've got your hand up, just carry on.
I think both of these kinds of things not only in the UK, but in Europe, that come from settler colonial countries. And we have similar sort of debates, but the experiences we have hardly ever feature into these kinds of talks here. Although colonialism and empire is kind of global, but the very specifics of what happens in each of these places is hardly ever recognized. So you can have a policy on, for instance, restitution, but it leaves out, as you mentioned in your introduction, racism, ideas of superiority, the whole Enlightenment debate, the Renaissance, as if the Renaissance was something internal to Europe. All of that gets left out, but we feel that in the colonies, so to speak, or the ex-colonies. And that experience hardly ever features into this. And it's very important, I think, that this be done. And the only organization I know that has tried to do this has been the Commonwealth Association of Museums. And we've had about 3 or 4 of those kinds of workshops. And it's incredibly difficult to get a policy together that fits every single circumstance. And that's really important because the experiences of what may be called indigeneity in Canada is vastly different from the indigeneity that we experience in Southern Africa. Thank you.
Yeah, it feels like it's such a huge pot that everything gets thrown into that it can't possibly accommodate all the different conversations that have to happen. Yeah. Sorry, I thought I saw someone's hand up. Any other reflections? I'll start, but I'll tell you some of the things I write in the margin of my notebook. I write the word essentialism with a question mark a lot. This is, I'm talking about going back years. I write who is a community? Who is this community that you're talking to? Recently, I've been thinking about the term metropolitan and what that actually means and how it can be kind of loaded in very, very different ways. But I just feel like there are things that I say to very kind of particular groups of people that I think need to happen in the main room. And I just wondered if others of you felt that there were those things, that conversations that you were having that weren't in the main room, that were happening somewhere in a side room that needed to be in the room. Yeah.
Hi. So I guess we were having a conversation just there about some of the frustrations. I mean, personally, I feel sometimes when I'm kind of listening to these discussions, I'm listening to papers, panels, I kind of wish that there was a space for things to be a bit more discursive, because I'm always feeling like I've got things to say and to respond to. And also we were also discussing how we sometimes feel conscious when there are these discussions taking place about worrying what people are going to say. Like, there's a lot of anxiety about how the discussions are going to play out, or someone might say the wrong thing. And so we kind of thinking about trying to create spaces to address where we can kind of address those feelings and the ways that we all sort of respond to them and kind of work them through together, I suppose. So I guess that's a question, that's a sort of comment about the format these things and these discussions take place, and somehow creating a space where people feel freed up to kind of talk about things.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think there's a space to make mistakes, I think, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I suppose for me was that I don't talk a lot about pre-plantation structures in Northern Ireland, and I don't think we do. And I think there's an uncomfortableness about that. And one of the consequences of that is that Neolithic structures all over the place are very badly looked after. I mean, they're not well signposted, there's no explanation, they're hard to find. And yet, when I was growing up in County Tyrone, it was the rooted me to my understanding of myself and my place.
Interesting, thank you. Do you want me to wind up now?
No, I've actually got questions, so the reason why I'm making you quiet is I'm just trying to think through this. I think my question is, at what stage, thank you, at what stage do we think that we've done enough side room chat? Because I suppose I'm feeling in Northern Ireland, there's an awful lot of side room stuff that is just beginning, really.
Yeah.
And, those conversations need to happen. Among all of us. This is the first conference of its kind that I'm aware of that's kind of tried to do what we're trying to do with it.
Yeah.
But also, how do we get those conversations into wider society, which is what, of course, Hannah's paper was about today. And an awful lot of that side room stuff still needs to happen.
Yeah, it's a good point. I think my concern is about the side room stuff that stays in the side room and is considered something that can't be in the main room. So rather than it being a precursor to what we talk about in the project, it becomes that sort of the niggly thing, and those are the things that make people anxious, and that's where you get that sense of every time a new project happens. When, as I said, as soon as race and racism come into the frame, that's when you'll get just these things that are anxiety in museum staff and in academia as well, and everywhere. Anxiety that can't be spoken and has no shape and feels very amorphous. And yet, when you kind of unpack it, that's actually where the problem is. And I think particularly around the loss of authority, I think that's the major thing, whether it's decolonising knowledge or whether we're talking about museums as kind of holders of repositories of, all meaning. that's, I think, unless we can start talking about how people feel about that loss of authority, and then, because everyone's always thinks it's a great idea, it's always a great idea, let's do this, let's do that, let's go and work with communities, let's do that, yes, we want to do that. They don't talk about the things that are making them uncomfortable around it. And then those things end up being kind of repressed, and like the repressed will always come back. And I think that's why I think it's very important that we can actually shine a light on that. But, thanks. Okay, shall I finish up? Oh, it's one more.
I only quickly wanted to add something, but I couldn't agree with you more. And I think there's a sort of framework, a psychological framework that's been developed in lots of places about courageous conversations and the need to basically have them in the first place in order to get to that deeper level. That was all I wanted to add. I think it's a very good idea and an absolutely necessary prerequisite.
And just to kind of link to what you were saying, I think about being really brave. I'm sort of, when I decided that I would come back and do this again, and was looked at this and thought, yes, I can do something here. And I started thinking about, you know, some of the work that I've done in the past, and I thought, I don't want to die in it to say on my epitaph, here's Roshi Naidoo, she maintained the status quo. You know, it's something else has to happen. And so we all have to be brave, but we have to acknowledge that, as it says here, take care, because it's dangerous. You better than anyone knows. Okay, thank you, and thanks for indulging me in a slightly strange experiment. Thanks a lot.